Terumot Perek Mishnah Gimel, third Mishnah in the 8th chapter of Terumot. Until now we've been talking about what happens if someone is in the middle of eating and he finds out that he's not allowed to eat what he's eating because it's chayav in Terumot and Ma'asrot. Either a woman whose husband died, he was a Kohen, or you're in the middle of eating, you find out it's Tameh. Those are the previous Mishnayot. Now we're going to talk about an interesting halacha called Achilat Arai. Okay, Achilat Arai means temporary eating. Now the halacha is, yes, I have to take, if I have tevel, I have produce, and I bring it into my house, I'm not chayav to take off Terumot and Ma'asrot until it's muchan, until it's ready, until it's kova'at lema'aser. So therefore, once I bring it into my house, it's kova'at lema'aser. Okay, or I bring it into my chatzer, into my property. But let's say, for example, we recently took a tiyul, and we're walking along on this path, and on the other side of the road we found that there were these wild grapes growing naturally. So everybody's like, he wanted to eat the grapes. Are we allowed, is a person allowed to eat the grapes allowed to eat the grapes out in the field? It was really wild, it was incredible, they were really tasty. So that's called, in halachic terminology, what's called is achilat arai. Here I can find it, these are the words, achilat arai. Achilat arai means temporary eating. Okay, and we're going to see that achilat arai, you're allowed to eat. If you're like out in their orchard, and you the orange orchard, you want to eat an orange, you don't have to take off Terumot and Ma'asrot, because only when you bring it into the chatzer, when you bring it into your courtyard, into your gates, into your wherever, into your house, then it's nikva'at lema'aser. But out in the field, you're allowed to eat one orange. It's called achilat arai without taking off Terumot and Ma'asrot. Okay, and so in the end, we were allowed to eat the grapes, but there's a machloket about how many grapes a person is allowed to eat and how many is not. Says the Mishnah. Okay, so there are two things. Just one more by way of introduction. There are two elements that are koveh lema'asrot. One is if it's brought into your chatzer. Okay, once you bring it into your chatzer, it's chayav in Terumot and Ma'asrot. And the other is Shabbat. Now, even if you're on the field and Shabbat comes, Shabbat is kovat lema'asrot. So says the Mishnah. Haya ochel be'eshkol ve'nichnas min hagina lechatzer. You're eating eshkol, a cluster of grapes, and you're eating it. You're out in the orchard, in the garden, and now you walk into your chatzer, into your personal courtyard. Okay, you're in the middle of eating. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yigmor. Rabbi Eliezer says you can finish what you ate. Rabbi Yoshua Omer Lo Yigmor. Rabbi Yoshua says you cannot finish what you ate. You have to stop and take off Terumot and Ma'asrot. Okay, says the Bartunur. We're going to read the Bartunur here because it's irrelevant. It's always relevant, but in order to understand the basic understanding. Talash eshkol migefen. You took a cluster of grapes off the grapevine. And you're plucking the grapes and eating. V'chatzer kova'at lema'aser. Chatzer is kovea lema'aser. Therefore, afilu achilat arai asura ad shitron v'yaser. You're not even allowed to eat temporarily because once you brought it into the chatzer, it's kovat. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yigmor, you can finish it. So the Bartunur says, interestingly, fascinating. Lo shuchal b'chatzer. You can't eat achilat arai in the chatzer. Ella yetzei chutz lechatzer v'yigmor le'echol eshkol b'gina. Take it back out, and then you can eat achilat arai. So therefore, even once you brought it in, you can take it back out. Rabbi Eliezer says. And Rabbi Yosua says, Lo yigmor afilu bagina. You can't, take it in, I gotta go out. No, once it's brought in, it's chayav, it's no longer achilat arai, and you have to take off Terumot and Ma'asrot. Similarly, chashecha leilei Shabbat. You're out in the gina, and you're eating your grapes. And now it became dark, and now Shabbat came, and Shabbat is kovat l'ma'aser. Rabbi Yoshua says yigmor. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Lo yigmor. Rabbi Yeshua says yigmor. Again, the Bartunur says, okay, Shabbat kovat lema'aser, afilu achilat arai asura. That's what we learned. Yigmor lemotzei Shabbat. He says you have to take it out to Bartunur. This is shitato. You can't finish it now. You brought it in. The Shabbat came, even there in the Gina. So therefore you can leave it until motzei Shabbat. Aval b'Shabbat atzmo modeh ba'asur. But even Rabbi Eliezer, he agrees that you're not allowed to eat it on Shabbat. And Rabbi Eliezer says, lo yigmor. Afilu lemotzei Shabbat ad shi'aser. Even on Motzei Shabbat, you can't finish it until you're Ya'aser. So it's just interesting. I want to share with you. The Rambam says something very interesting about Achilat Arai. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay, the Rambam says, okay, he's talking about Chatzer Kovat. He's talking about Achilat Arai. Ein tevel nikva lema'aser ad sheyikansu lebeito. Tevel is not chayav. Okay, v'hu yikansu derech hashar. Okay, that's coming through the shower, and there's a trick. If you cheated and brought it through the outside window, there's a way of getting out of giving Terumot and Ma'asrot. Okay, And since you brought it in, kishem shabayit kovea, kacha chatzer kovaat lemaaser. This is what we just learned. Chatzer is also kovea. Ezei chatzer kovaat. So then, what kind of chatzer is kovaat, etc., etc. Okay, but then what's considered achilat arai? So the Rambam says something very interesting. What happened is I called the Rav Hadaya, and he says, and I asked him, are we allowed to eat this? Are we allowed to eat these grapes? So we were actually out in the field, but the Rambam says something very interesting. He says the following: Gefen shinitua b'chatzer. If you have a gefen in the chatzer, you're allowed to eat achilat arai. Okay, if it's in the chatzer. Lo yitol kol eshkol v'yochal. You can't take the whole cluster of grapes. Meaning, achilat arai is only what you can eat at one time. If you take the whole eshkol, if you take the whole cluster of grapes, that's not arai anymore because you're now eating. That's a legitimate amount. Ela migarger achad achad. Rather, you can take one grape at a time and eat. V'chein berimon. The same thing is the berimon. So now I'm not paskening because it sounds like here in this case where you're in the chatzer. In our case, I think we were okay because remember I told you in the case we were out in the field, literally out in the middle of nowhere. It was across the street in the middle of nowhere. We ate the grapes. That's not kovat. It's not a chatzer. But the Rambam is very careful about what achilat arai is, especially with grapes. If a person has a sha'ila, if you're not sure what you should do, take one grape at a time and eat it. But more than that, you shouldn't take the whole eshkol because maybe that's not arai. Maybe that's already achilat keva. We'll stop here. If you have any questions or comments, or you're also out in the field and you're wondering about grapes or whatever, then you ask your local Orthodox rabbi. But if you like to talk to me, rspolter@gmail.com, and we'll dedicate the learning to the memory of my father, Rav Simcha ben Yitzchak Kalman. Have a great day.